Examples of oxidation and reduction. Now let us take examples of the reactions in which we can understand what exactly the oxidation and reduction reactions are. Let us take an example in which magnesium solid is heated in presence of oxygen. What we get is magnesium oxide solid. In this, magnesium is present in its atomic state. It has not lost any electron, and when it is turning to magnesium oxide, it is present in its +2 state. So it is, this magnesium is losing 2 electrons. So since it is losing 2 electrons, it is undergoing oxidation. On the other hand, oxygen is also present in its atomic state. It has not lost or gained any electron. So it is now changing in the reaction to -2 state. We all know oxygen is existing in its -2 state. So it is actually is in gain of 2 electrons. So it's a process in which we will say it is undergoing reduction. So in terms of electrons, magnesium is losing 2 electrons, oxygen is gaining 2 electrons, it is undergoing oxidation, it is undergoing reduction. In terms of addition of oxygen, since oxygen is added to magnesium, the magnesium is getting oxidized, and therefore this can be called an oxidation reaction of magnesium. But practically what is happening is that the reduction as well as oxidation are taking place simultaneously. This thing becomes much more clear when we see the same example in terms of the electrons. But when we see this in terms of the addition of a more electronegative atom or removal of hydrogen, it can be categorized as a reduction or an oxidation process. But practically all reduction and or oxidation processes are also redox reactions. Let us see another example in which another electronegative atom is added to an electropositive or more reactive metal. Let us take example of aluminium. When it is heated with chlorine, what we get is AlCl3 solid. Now again, in this case, it's not the oxygen which is there, but we can still call it this to be an oxidation process because the more electronegative chlorine is added to the aluminium. So it can be categorized as oxidation process. But what is important to note in this case is that since aluminium is undergoing the loss of electron, 3 electrons are lost because it is in +3, aluminium is in -1, and chlorine on the other hand is in gain of 3 electrons. Basically 3 chlorines are involved in this, 1 chlorine accepting 1. So what we find is this is undergoing oxidation, this is undergoing reduction. So it's a redox process, redox reaction. But since the more electronegative atom is added to this, it's an example of a process in which aluminium is getting oxidized. We can take some more examples in which addition of hydrogen takes place. So we can call it a reduction process. Like let us take example of a very simple ethene gas. Since it has a double bond, we can add, it's an unsaturated compound, we can add hydrogen to this. When hydrogen is added to this, what we get is CH3, we get ethane gas. Now what is important to note is the hydrogen is added across this molecule like this. The addition of hydrogen is done, and the processes in which hydrogen is added are called what? Reduction. Are called reduction processes, and of course this reaction takes place in presence of certain catalysts like platinum. But what is important to note is since the hydrogen is added to this molecule, this particular process can be called a reduction process. But in terms of electrons, if we see, it is basically the redox process. Redox process how? Because hydrogen is added. Here, the moment hydrogen is added to this, the hydrogen loses electron and carbon gains electron. So hydrogen is undergoing oxidation. This compound is undergoing reduction. But usually, since there is not much difference in the electronegativities of carbon and hydrogen, we never call these reactions as redox reactions. We more or less we categorize them in the form of the addition of hydrogen as reduction and addition of oxygen as oxidation. In a very similar way, like we can take example of a methane molecule. When actually a gas, when combusted in oxygen, what we get is CO2 gas, and we get a water in the form of a gas. So we also know in this case also, what is happening is an organic compound in an organic compound, oxygen is added. Since oxygen is added, this compound gets oxidized to CO2. So though it's a redox reaction, but since addition of oxygen takes place, we call it an oxidation process. But what is interesting to notice, we generally try to make these reactions, the examples which we study of these oxidation reductions are more of from the inorganic chemistry, where we can easily see from the electrons point of view that what is happening to which species, whether it is losing electron or gaining electron. That is why it becomes much more easier for us to categorize them as the redox reactions.